Well, for more on voters' economic priorities in this election, I'm joined by Uri Dadush, a senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, as we heard there, some big economic concerns for US voters. How do you think those concerns have changed since the 2008 election?
I think people are much more aware of the inequality issue. The recovery that we've had has been slow, and it's benefited disproportionately the very high spheres of the income distribution. And I think they're much more sensitive to that, and therefore they're much more sensitive to issues relating to jobs and issues relating to trade.
So given all that, if you look at the big picture, what grade would you give the US economy right now for its current performance?
I would give it, quite honestly, a B+. Now that might surprise you, but I give it a B+, which is a pretty good grade, in part because it is doing so much better than a lot of advanced countries. And frankly, we are in much better shape than we were in 2008.
Now, even with that B+, we're still seeing pretty sluggish growth. What do you think it's really going to take to pick up that momentum?
I think in part it's a confidence issue. There is still a lack of confidence in the economy for many reasons. But also, I believe that investments, particularly investments in infrastructure, would be a good thing to do now in the US. I don't think monetary policy has much more to give in terms of boosting economic growth in the US. And of course, the US will do better if the rest of the world, including China, which is under attack at the moment for various reasons, if the rest of the world does better, then the United States will do better.
Now, you mentioned monetary policy, and the Fed did finally raise rates, and now it's taking a kind of wait-and-see approach. What, if anything, does their action of raising the rates, if anything, say about the health of the US economy?
Well, first of all, it says that we can do it. And after a lot of thought and analysis, the Federal Reserve has determined that they can do this, that it's about time to move towards normality. And that should be seen as a sign of confidence in the US economy. At the same time, I think they have to do it cautiously, and they are, because there are so many uncertainties, particularly in the rest of the world.
And as we speak about some of these global uncertainties, you mentioned the slowdown in China, and you're also seeing the ECB trying to pump up Europe's economy. How do you think that's all going to affect the US in the long run?
In the long run, the better the European and Chinese economies do, and the Mexican economy does, another country that is under attack at the moment, the better the United States is going to do. Very simply because, as people often say, 95% of consumers of the world live outside these borders. And they are the big purchasers at the end of the day. And that's where a lot of the long-term economic growth of the world is going to be, in China, in Mexico, in a lot of these emerging markets. And they are fantastic markets for United States products, which has a huge advantage in high technology.
Now, speaking of consumers, perhaps in the US also, according to the Pew Research Center, there are now roughly as many adults in middle-class households as there are now in lower and upper income households. So with that shift, what do you think's really been pushing that?
Well, the American middle class, and by the way, the working class as well, has been under a lot of pressure over the last several years. A lot of this has to do with technology, labor-saving, essentially, technology, and the financialization of the economy, the concentration of wealth at the very top of the system. Trade, I believe, has contributed a little bit to this, but it isn't the main story. The main story is we just have very, very fancy, more sophisticated machines, and they are putting pressure on wages. Anything that is easy to do, so to speak, that doesn't require very high levels of skills or interpersonal connections is under threat from the machines.
And you mentioned wages as we're talking jobs. We're seeing the unemployment is at an 8-year low of 4.9%, which sounds like good news, but a lot of people are really focusing on the quality versus the quantity of these jobs. Lastly, what's your view on that?
Well, I think, first of all, many advanced countries would kill to get a 4.9% unemployment rate, so we shouldn't just dismiss that. It's a good thing that we're creating all of these jobs, but it's true that a lot of the jobs are paying less. And it is also true that there is a decline in the participation rate of the labor force, although actually a lot of that has to do with demographics. People like me getting a little bit older and wanting to spend a little more time with their families.
So perhaps not as much doom and gloom. It could be just people kind of aging out of the workforce.
Precise. Some of it is that.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Uri Dadush, thank you so much for joining us from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace.
Thank you.